Winter smothered St. Louis, gray, cold, unrelenting. That morning, frost clung to the bus stop trash bins, and Mark's breath spilled white into the air. He never expected what he was about to see. On the wet cement, something shivered. Not a trash bag, not a rag. A puppy, a Doberman, barely a month old. Its frame was skeletal, ribs jutting out like rotted beams. But what froze Mark's heart wasn't the hunger. It was the tumor, huge, pendulous, hanging from its throat, so heavy it dragged the tiny head down against the ground. Across its belly, along the left mammary line, 2 more masses bulged, raw and red. The skin on its hip and tail split open, ulcered, oozing pus. Each breath rattled short and sharp like a frayed thread about to snap. The puppy's clouded brown eyes lifted, locking on him, not pleading but asking a single question. "Is anyone left for me?" Time stopped. 12 years earlier, Mark had held his wife's hand on a hospital bed, powerless as the heart monitor slowed to silence. The look in her fading eyes, the look in this puppy's eyes was the same, and it cut him open. He dropped to his knees, scooped it up. The body burned with fever, trembling like an autumn leaf. The smell of blood and rot clung to his hands. And then, in the cracked voice of a man who had already lost too much, he whispered, "You're not alone anymore, baby. If you fight, I'll fight with you." It wasn't just a promise. It was the beginning of the greatest battle of his remaining life. Mark was 67, widowed, children scattered, too busy to call more than a few times a year. He lived alone in a red brick house on the edge of town, with nothing but a rocking chair, a faded radio, and the tick of a wall clock. Most days ended in silence, but not that morning. In his arms, the puppy's breath fluttered, too fragile, too small to stand against fate. And Mark knew. Either he fought, or he would watch another life slip away before his eyes. He named her Grace, because if she survived, there was no other word for it but a miracle. The nearest veterinary hospital was half a day's drive. Time wasn't on their side. But taking her through the freezing wind now would be the same as signing her death warrant. Her body was too weak. So Mark chose the only option left: turn his old kitchen into an emergency ward. He dragged out a dented aluminum basin and filled it with warm water. Gently, he lowered Grace in, washing away mud and dried blood matted in her fur. She trembled, but her eyes never left his. He reached for the towel his wife had once used, drying each ear, each open sore. He cracked open a can of condensed milk, diluted it, and with a spoon let drop after drop fall into her mouth. Sometimes she choked, coughed, milk running down her chin, but still she licked for more, clinging to life. Night fell. He laid his wife's old sweater by the fireplace and placed Grace on it. Then he sat beside her, eyes locked on every fragile breath. Beneath the steady tick of the clock, Mark heard another sound, faint, urgent, the unraveling music of a life on the edge. And right there, in his own kitchen, he understood. The battle had only just begun. Mark lived in a red brick house on the outskirts of St. Louis. Built back in the 70s, its roof tiles had darkened, the chimney streaked with moss. On the front porch, an old rocking chair still creaked whenever the wind cut through. 12 years since his wife's death, the house held only the tick of a clock and the fading hum of a country song drifting from the radio. At 67, he had grown accustomed to silence. His days ended with a weak cup of tea, a yellow lamp glowing against the framed photograph of his late wife. Often he would sit there, fingertips brushing the glass, whispering stories that no one would ever answer. And then, one winter morning, The silence broke. Grace lay curled on his wife's old sweater beside the fireplace. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, pausing as if the thread of life was about to snap. Mark sat at the kitchen table, hands still trembling with the stench of blood and pus he hadn't managed to wash away. He took a clean cloth, dipped it in warm water, and pressed it gently against her hip and tail. The skin there was cracked, ulcered, and seeping blood. Each touch made Grace flinch, gasp, but then her small brown eyes lifted, steady on him, not accusing, but pleading. "Don't leave me." Mark's voice rasped, low and broken. "I won't. Not this time." He remembered the last night in the hospital. The doctor shook his head, the heart monitor's long, unbroken tone. He had sat there, powerless, as his wife slipped away. He could not save her, and that helplessness had haunted him for 12 long years. With Grace, he felt something different, a second chance. A chance not to let go. The nearest veterinary hospital was half a day's drive. Outside, the cold bit like knives. His pickup was old. Grace was too weak. If he tried to move her now, she might die before they reached the road out of town. So he turned the kitchen into an infirmary. He boiled water, mixed diluted milk, and fed her drop by drop from a spoon. Sometimes she choked, coughed, milk spilling down her lips, but she kept licking, desperate for more. He stayed patient, each spoonful carrying with it the weight of hope. On the kitchen table, the yellow lamp cast its shadow long against the worn tile floor, the silhouette of an old man, hunched, hand shaking with the spoon, eyes fixed on every twitch of a fragile life. By nightfall, Mark dragged his chair close to the fireplace. He did not sleep. He sat listening to the faint breaths, leaning down each time she stirred, laying his hand against her back. The fever heat beneath his palm stabbed at him like a blade. Memories surged, the way his wife once placed her hand on his chest when his breathing grew tight, the way she smiled through the pain. It all came back, and now he was doing the same for a stranger's dog. He realized then, the grief still lived inside him, but the love had never gone out. Morning light broke through the window. Mark brewed coffee, sat watching Grace. Slowly, she opened her eyes, licked her lips, and shifted weakly. A small signal, but enough to make his heart tighten with hope. He bent low, whispering, "Good girl. You're stronger than you think." Outside, the wind nudged the rocking chair, its creak echoing through the porch. But inside, life had returned to a house too long hollowed by silence. Mark knew the road ahead was long. The tumors still loomed like ticking bombs. Death still lingered close. But at least he was no longer alone in the red brick house. He had Grace. And Grace had him. 2 days passed. In Mark's kitchen, the fire still burned, the towels still damp, and the ticking still fell like needles straight into his chest. But Grace was different. She could no longer swallow the milk. Her body burned with fever, her breathing faint. Brown eyes flicked open, then closed again, like doors slowly shutting. Mark laid his hand on her back, the skin searing hot. His heart pounded. He knew the time had come. If he didn't get her to the hospital, everything he had fought for would mean nothing. He pulled on his old wool coat, wrapped Grace in a knitted blanket, and placed her in a wooden box lined with towels. Before leaving, he looked back at the kitchen, the place he had fought 2 sleepless nights, and whispered under his breath, "Just hold on until we get there." The old pickup coughed, roared alive. The road into the city lay under a sheet of cold fog. Wind sliced through the door cracks like blades. The veterinary hospital was half a day away, and Mark understood. This was a journey of life and death. On the passenger seat, the wooden box jolted with every pothole. Grace lay curled inside, barely moving. One breath. Then another. Short. Breaking. For the first half hour, Mark drove in silence, listening only to the tired engine and the scream of the wind. His eyes kept darting sideways. Grace trembled, head drooping. Then suddenly, convulsions. A tiny whimper escaped. Mark's shaking hand landed on her head, the other clutching the wheel. His voice cracked, tangled with breath. "Stay with me, baby. Don't give up now. We're almost there." No answer. Just the faintest hiss of breath. A gust slammed the truck, rattling the frame. Mark's grip tightened. Memories surged. 12 years earlier, he had driven like this too, chasing an ambulance with his wife inside. Her figure was lost in the red strobe. He never got to say a word. Now, leaning toward a fragile creature, he begged, "Please, fight just a little longer. Don't leave me. Not like this." His eyes blurred. Tears mixed with weary breaths. The road ahead stretched white and endless in fog. An hour passed. The dashboard clock crawled. Grace breathed, then stopped, then breathed again. Each pause strangled Mark's lungs. Only when he heard the next gasp did he dare inhale. He flicked on the radio, caught an old channel. A country ballad crackled through the weak signal. He whispered, voice low as if for both of them. "Hear that? That's for you. You're not leaving yet." His wrinkled hand stayed on her head, steady, as though warmth alone might keep her alive. 3 hours slipped by. Noonlight pierced the fog, landing across Grace's face. For the first time, her eyelids fluttered. A long breath left her. Fragile, but clearer. Mark seized it. He bent low, voice trembling. "Good girl. That's it. Just stay with me." The truck rolled into the city. Low buildings emerged from the haze. Ahead, the red sign of the veterinary hospital glowed like a beacon. Mark exhaled, but tears spilled. He knew they weren't safe yet. The hardest part was still waiting. But at least, Grace had survived the road. When the truck stopped at the gates, he grabbed the wooden box and rushed inside. White neon lights blazed overhead. Shoes clattered on tile. A nurse bent low, checked quickly, then lifted her head, face set in urgency. "She's critical. We need to act fast." Mark stepped back, spine pressed to the wall. His breath broke, mirroring hers. He knew in that moment Grace's fate no longer rested in his hands. The veterinary hospital corridor blazed under harsh neon lights. The stinging smell of antiseptic hung thick in the air. Mark set the wooden box down, his hands trembling as if still carrying that fragile breath inside. A young doctor knelt and checked quickly. Nurses lifted Grace onto the table. The heart monitor beeped, each scattered note stabbing into Mark's chest. The head doctor, gray hair, spectacles off, met his eyes. "She's critical. The tumor could rupture any day. Surgery is her only chance. But her body is far too weak right now. If we operate, the odds of her surviving anesthesia are almost zero." Mark froze. His heart sank like stone. "So, what do we do?" "We build her up. Fluids, antibiotics, careful feeding. We give her a fighting chance." He nodded, eyes wet. He understood. Every passing day was another with the blade hanging over Grace's neck. That first night at the hospital, Mark sat on a hard plastic chair, hands clasped before him. The waiting room was empty, only the tick of a wall clock, only the steady hiss of a respirator in the room beyond. Every time the door cracked open, he jumped, chest seizing. But it was just a nurse passing by. No one called Grace's name. He closed his eyes, memory crashing back. His wife, years ago, was beneath the same white lights, machines humming around her, heart monitor skipping beats. He had sat powerless, clutching her hand, counting each beep. Tonight was no different, except the hand he could not hold belonged to a stranger's dying pup. A stranger, and yet so painfully familiar. Day 2. Grace remained in the oxygen chamber. The fever hadn't broken. The tumor is still swollen, ticking like a bomb. She needed more time. Mark pressed his hand against the glass. Grace stirred, blinking slowly. That alone broke him. Tears slid as he whispered, voice shaking. "I see you, baby. I'm not going anywhere." He brought his wife's old wool scarf and placed it in the chamber. Grace curled into it, eyes closing. The sight cut him open, like seeing his wife again, her last weak smile under his hand. Day 3. Exhaustion claimed him. He dozed on the chair, chin dropping to his chest. A young nurse touched his shoulder, pressing a paper cup of coffee into his hands. "You should rest," she said softly. He forced a smile. "I can't." Not until she's safe. Every hour, he watched. When Grace managed a spoonful of thin porridge through the tube, he felt like he had won a war. When she vomited it back up, despair drowned him again. His heart surged and crashed, wave after relentless wave. One evening, the doctor called him in. The ultrasound screen glowed with a dark mass. The doctor's voice was grave. "The longer we wait, the greater the risk of rupture. But too soon, and she won't survive the anesthesia. We're walking a razor's edge." Mark stared at the grainy image, sweat trickling despite the winter chill. His voice broke. "So what's her chance?" Silence. Then, quietly, "Less than 50-50. Maybe less." The words dropped like stone into a well. Mark sank into the chair, hands wringing tight, tears falling unchecked. His whisper barely reached the air, unsure whether to the doctor or himself. But she deserves that chance. That night, he returned to the waiting room. The small heater in the corner gave no warmth. Wrapped in his old coat, he curled up on the chair, staring at the ceiling. Half dreaming, he heard Grace's weak breaths echo, tangled with the sound of his wife's voice calling his name. He woke with a start, shaken, the weight of memory and loss pressing down. And he understood. If Grace survived, it wouldn't just be her second chance. It would be his as well. A chance to stop living like a man already dead. At dawn, Mark rose, gripping the chair for balance. Before him, morning light cut across the glass of the ward. Inside, Grace still breathed. That was enough. One breath, one hope. Day 6 since Grace was admitted. The doctor stepped out, face grim. He set a file on the table, then locked eyes with Mark. "It's time. We can't wait any longer." Mark sat frozen. The words struck like a hammer. He knew this was the moment. Life or death. The doctor's voice dropped low. "The tumor is at risk of rupturing. We'll remove it today. But it's a very risky surgery. She's small, she's weak. Significant blood loss is almost guaranteed. You need to understand, there's a very real chance she won't survive the anesthesia, let alone the procedure." Mark nodded, throat tight. His shaking hand clutched the pen. He signed his name on the consent form, the strokes jagged, blurred by tears falling onto the paper. He whispered, "Fight, baby. Please, fight." They wheeled Grace into the operating room. The steel doors closed, leaving behind a cold and sterile. Mark sank into a chair, fists clenched, heart pounding wild. The clock on the wall ticked. each strike like a gavel on his chest. Hour 1. No message. Hour 2. Silence. Hour 3. Mark's chest locked tight. He stared at the door, hearing the faint beeping from somewhere beyond, until it cut out. He shot to his feet, heart plummeting. Memory flooded back. 12 years earlier. Another hospital. Different white lights. The same suffocating weight. And the news then had been a death sentence. Mark buried his face in his hands. The prayer tore out, fractured. Not again. Please, God, not again. Don't take her too. In despair, he remembered the first night he found Grace. Shivering beside a trash bin, the tumor was dragging her head into the dirt, those brown eyes locked on him, not begging but demanding. Is anyone left for me? He trembled. If she didn't come back today, that look would haunt him for the rest of his life. Hour 4. The door swung open. The surgeon stepped out, mask pulled down. His face was grave. Then slowly, it broke into a smile. She made it. She fought harder than any pup I've ever seen. Mark went still. Then his shoulders shook. Tears came, uncontrollable. His sobs rang down the corridor. An old man crumpled, crying like a child, while strangers turned to look. But he didn't care. The only words he heard were 4 that mattered. She made it. Grace lay in the recovery chamber. A long incision stitched across her throat, bandaged white. The ventilator ticked steadily and slowly. Her brown eyes flickered open, weak but glowing when they caught his familiar figure. Mark pressed his hand to the glass, voice breaking. You did it, baby. You really did it. In the cold glare of hospital light, he saw his reflection beside her fragile body. An old man, trembling. A small creature, scarred but alive. Both battered, both scarred, yet both still breathing. That night, Mark never left the recovery room. He sat close, watching every rise and fall of her chest. Each time the monitor beeped, he drew a breath with her. Each twitch of her body brought a smile through his tears. He knew. The battle wasn't over. The biopsy still waited. The shadow of relapse still loomed. But in this moment, Grace had walked back from the edge of death. And Mark, for the first time in years, felt his heart come alive again. Grace was wheeled out of surgery in a small oxygen chamber. A long stitch traced down her neck, wrapped in a white bandage. Her frail body still carried the sharp sting of antiseptic, but her heartbeat was steady now. Mark stood right there. Brown eyes cracked open, finding his familiar gaze. He leaned down and pressed his hand to the glass. For the first time in days, his lips curved into a real smile. You did it, baby. You really did it. The first day after surgery, Grace hardly moved. Only the faint rise and fall of her chest beneath the gauze. The monitor beeped, marking each beat. Mark sat beside her, his back bent low on a plastic chair, eyes locked to her body. Each beep, he inhaled, as if the machine was feeding life into him too. That night, he never closed his eyes. When a nurse brought him a blanket, he only managed a weary smile. I'm fine. Just keep her warm. Day 2. Grace's tail twitched. A small tremor, but enough to break Mark open in tears. He slid a finger through the cage slit, brushing her damp nose. She licked once, then sank back into sleep. Good girl, he whispered. Day 3. The nurse fed her diluted milk through a tube. She swallowed slowly, breath heavy afterward. But her eyes stayed open longer, scanning the room, settling each time on Mark. He sat with his hand against the glass, pride shining through tired eyes. Something stirred inside him. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of every second, each blink, each breath Grace drew, all of it precious as gold. Day 4. The doctor walked in, biopsy results in hand. Mark rose, heart hammering. The smaller tumors, benign. The large one was a soft tissue sarcoma. But we got it all. Margins are clean. Mark held his breath, vision swimming. He barely heard the rest, just 2 words seared into him. Benign. Clean. Tears fell. He dropped into the chair, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. All those nights, all that waiting, washed away in that moment. A week later, Grace was moved out of the oxygen chamber. She staggered across the white tile, every step trembling. Thin legs slid, but she forced herself to stand, to step again. Mark reached out. She pressed against his hand, leaning into him. That's it, baby. One step at a time. He remembered the day his wife tried standing after heart surgery, the same trembling legs, the same hand he held out to steady her. But that time, she never walked further. This time, the little dog did. Step by step, she truly walked. The day Grace was cleared for discharge, Mark carried her in his arms, out to the truck. Winter sunlight broke through the fog, lighting her brown eyes. She closed them, resting her head on his chest, exhaling as if content. Behind the wheel, Mark pulled her close, voice breaking. We made it home, girl. We actually made it. The red brick house was no longer silent. The kitchen now held a shining steel bowl by the table. The fireplace glowed beside a small bed with soft blankets. Each evening, Mark rocked in the old chair, hot tea in hand, while Grace curled at his feet, lifting her head now and then, eyes glowing like embers. The clock's ticking still filled the room, but now it mingled with steady breaths, with the tap of small paws on wood. A new song had risen in a house long hollowed by silence. Mark looked down, whispering, You brought me back to life, Grace. And in that moment, he knew. A miracle had happened, not only for a dying pup, but for an old man who thought he had lost every reason to live. Winter in St. Louis passed slowly. Snow lay heavy on the red tile roof, and wind whistled through the old chimney. Inside the house that had been silent for far too long, new sounds rose. The clink of a steel bowl, the tap of small claws on wood, the steady breath of a life that had just stepped back from death's door. Grace recovered faster than anyone expected. The long stitch on her neck had dried, and fur was starting to grow again. Each morning she raced around the kitchen, tail wagging as Mark brewed his coffee. At night she curled beneath the rocking chair, brown eyes glowing in the firelight. Mark had changed, too. The man who once lived only with a photograph of his wife now had reason to rise early, to switch on the kitchen light, to speak aloud. He wasn't just existing anymore. He was living, again. One January evening, as the wind cut across the porch, Mark heard a sound at the door. He opened it. On the step lay a thin gray cat, fur falling out in patches, yellow eyes staring at him in despair. It shivered, breathing rough. Mark set down a bowl of milk. The cat hesitated, then stepped forward. Grace sniffed, then, unexpectedly, lay down beside it. No growl, no chase, just a glance, a wag of the tail as if to say, It needs saving, too, like I once did. Mark smiled, eyes filling. He whispered, Welcome home, buddy. He named it Harbor, because it had found a place to anchor. In the days that followed, a rare scene unfolded inside the red brick house. A Doberman pup who had survived a massive tumor and an abandoned old cat curled up together before the fire. 2 lives, 2 broken fates, bound under the roof of an old man who thought he'd lost all faith. Mark watched from his chair, heart trembling with emotion. In his mind echoed his wife's words from long ago. As long as you keep your heart open, you'll never be alone. He had closed his heart for more than a decade, but now, because of Grace and Harbor, it opened again. Each morning, Mark carried his coffee onto the porch. Grace bounded across the yard, ears sharp, tail wagging bright. Harbor dozed in the sun, gray fur glowing silver. Passers-by sometimes stopped, smiling, asking, "That's your family?" Mark lifted his face, the wrinkles lighting with a smile. "Yes. My second chance." From then on, the red brick house was no longer a tomb of silence and sorrow. It became a home for a lonely old man, a dog once marked for death, and a cat abandoned at the edge of life. 3 lives, once adrift, pieced together into something whole. Grace grew stronger each day, her eyes brighter. Harbor found peace for his final years. And Mark found himself again. Word spread through the neighborhood. People began calling the red brick house the Second Hope House. Children came to watch Grace run. Neighbors left cat food boxes at the door. Anyone passing by couldn't help but smile. And for those who heard their story, one truth lingered. Compassion can save not just a life, but a broken heart. The screen fades to black. Words appear. Grace survived. Harbor found home, and an old man found his heart again. Maybe you're sitting alone now in a quiet room or somewhere that echoes a silence of your own. You've heard this story, and I want to ask softly, have you ever saved a life? Maybe it was just a stray cat at your door, a trembling dog on the roadside, or even a tiny bird with a broken wing in your garden. Think back to that moment, the moment you bent down, reached out, and saw those small eyes meet yours. Eyes that seemed to say, "I'm alive, because of you." That is the miracle. A simple miracle, powerful enough to change 2 hearts at once. Grace was given a second chance, Harbor too, and Mark, a man who thought hope was gone, found family again. I believe you've had a moment like that. And if not yet, perhaps tomorrow or the day after, it will come. When it does, remember, a touch, a bowl of food, even a whisper, can change a destiny. Thank you for staying, for listening, for opening your heart with ours. If this story touched you, please share it. Let others believe that compassion still walks this world. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe. Think of it as a promise that we'll meet again in moments that make the heart tremble. Because sometimes, saving one life is how we save ourselves.